بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذرياته ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته وانتهج نهجه إلى يوم الدين. تركنا المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزغ عنها إلا هالك. ثم أما بعد. So, alhamdulillah, we are reading from Al-Fath al-Rabbani al-Rabbani by Shaykh Abd al-Jilani radiallahu anhu. And over the course of the past 2 months or so, we have been reading almost daily, say for Fridays, one discourse, or at least discussing one of the discourses of the 62 that were recorded for the Shaykh in the year 545 and partially in the year 546 after the hijrah of our Habib, our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as the title suggests, Al-Fath wal-Fayd. So Fatah means that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted you and gives you of openings. Wal-Fayd, which has been sent down, I translate it as outpourings. And these came from the heart of Shaykh Abd al-Jilani, whose name is perhaps arguably the most famous name of the great Muslim scholars and awliya that the Ummah has known. And we see that from his words, and as described by his students, that he read or that he gave these discourses not from notes and not from a particular charisma that he had, but something that stirred in his heart. So much in the same way, in the manner that the Prophet ﷺ described Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who the maqam of al-Siddiqiyya, that he had Siddiqiyya, he had Sidq, sincerity in its highest form. And he said about him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr did not supersede you or exceed any of you in terms of the number of prayers he did, extra prayers or fasting or anything like that. وَلَكِنْ بِشَيْءٍ وَقَرَ فِي صَدْرِهِ, but rather by something that stirred in his heart. So the stirring of something in the heart, right, which is what this is what it is. Al-Fatah wal-Fayd, openings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you, understandings. And throughout these discourses, the Shaykh has kind of outlined for us the manner by which to do that. And perhaps nearly in every discourse, he states it one way or the other. And his methodology, if we were to summarize it, is to stick closely to the Quran and the Sunnah and to follow it as best as one can. Make the Prophet ﷺ your true exemplar in deed and in speech. And to work on Islah al-Batin, to work on rectifying the inner, worked on rectifying the states of your Iman, to try to engender states of sabr, of patience, and of shukr, of gratitude, of rida, of contentment, so forth. And do that by submitting to the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once you do that, then you will begin to see fa'al Allah yajri fik. You will see the divine act as it reveals itself within you. And this is usually preceded by what he calls al-fana, and tafna an nafsika wa an ahlika wa an al-wujud wa an al-khalq, so that you become oblivious and you have your wujud, your being with God and not being with anyone else. And this is something other ulama have spoken about, but the Shaykh kind of puts it in very accessible, I think, and simple terms by which to understand. So we have arrived at the 61st discourse out of 62. So that leaves one more, hopefully, inshallah. We'll do that in the next session tomorrow, same time. And we'll begin looking at it from the top, where he says, رضي الله عنه: سألك سائل عن الخواطر فقال ما يدرك ما الخاطر خواترك من الشيطان والطبع والهوى والدنيا همك ما أهمك خواترك من جنس همك ما يعلم خاطر الحق عز وجل لا يجيء إلا إلى قلب خال عما سواه، كما قال معاذ الله أن نأخذ إلا من وجدنا متاعنا عنده. إذا كان الله عز وجل وذكره عندك فلا جرم يمتلئ قلبك من قربه وتهرب خواطر الشيطان والهوى والدنيا من عندك. للدنيا خاطر والآخرة خاطر، للملك خاطر، وللنفس خاطر، وللقلب خاطر، وللحق عز وجل خاطر. فتحتاج أيها الصادق إلى دفع جميع الخواطر والسكون إلى الخاطر الحق عز وجل. إذا أعرضت عن خاطر النفس وخاطر الهوى وخاطر الشيطان وخاطر الدنيا، جاءك خاطر الآخرة، ثم جاءك خاطر الملك، ثم خاطر الحق عز وجل أخيرا وهو الغاية. إذا صح قلبك وقف عند الخاطر وقال له: أي خاطر أنت مما أنت؟ فيقول له: أنا خاطر كذا وكذا، أنا خاطر حق من الحق، أنا ناصح محب، الحق عز وجل يحبك فأنا أحبك، أنا السفير، أنا حظك من حال النبوة. So let's look at that section first. So he said, after some discussion in response to a question someone put to him about al-khawatir. Here he translates as notions, which is serviceable translation. I would also say it can mean one's thoughts, the things that kind of pop into your head, as people say today popularly, like, oh, that just popped into my head. I don't know where it came from. This is called a khatir. And probably contrary to conventional wisdom, you can do something to influence the khawatir that come to you, as the Shaykh is saying here, at least from the perspective of Islamic spirituality. So yes, there are khawatir that are nafsaniyah, right, that are fueled by the nafs, fueled by the ego, fueled by the, as he says, al-taba' wal-hawa, about caprice. But also there are other khawatir, such as those that come from the angels, those that help you to think about the akhirah and not the ula and not the dunya. And then there's khawatir that come directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-haq azza wa jal. So this is what he's talking about here. So he says, how to explain to you what notions or khawatir are. Your notions come from the devil, the shaitan, natural impulses, taba', the passions, hawa, and this world. Your interest or concern, ham, is whatever is most important to you, ahammaka. And this is a popular saying, hammuka ma ahammaka, right? What you're going to be thinking about, what you're going to be contemplating, what's going to keep you up at night is what's important to you. So if the dunya is important to you, wajam' al-amwal is important to you, and hutam al-dunya is important to you, and your 401k is important to you, and your stock equities are important to you, then you'll stay up at night thinking about those things. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is important to you, if the akhirah is important to you, then your thoughts will more be trained in that direction. So he said, your notions correspond in kind to your interest while it is active. A notion or a khatir inspired by the Lord of Truth, al-Haq Azza wa Jal, comes only to the heart, free from anything apart from him. So the khatir al-Haq then is unique in that it will not make muzahama, as they say, لا تزاحم الخواطر الأخرى. It's not going to get mixed in there with the other khawatir, because when the khatir al-Haq comes, you'll know it. It will be clear, it will be precise, and it will be profound and powerful, and it will overcome anything else that is there. But in order to avail ourselves of that khatir, as I said, one must do some preparatory work on their nafs, on their nufus. So if we are mired in thoughts of satiation and gathering of things of the dunya and what I'm going to eat next for lunch or for dinner or for dessert, and imagine, we're thinking about those things while we're offering one of the 5 prayers and so forth. So there is some mujahada, right? There is some striving and struggling that has to be done in order to avail ourselves of these, what could be very powerful and true and profound khawatir, right? Notions that come from the haqq. And usually these type of khawatir, they don't necessarily tell you, oh, give zakat here or pray here. Usually those are the ones that come from the angels, and the angels also can do that. But the one from the haqq, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will be something like a profound realization, right? Something kind of, like a light bulb epiphany, as they call it, comes in, and you say, oh, now I understand why this happened and how this is so. And you'll feel the detachment from the dunya, right? And you'll feel a raghba, and a longing for the akhirah, and even better, a longing for al-haq, a longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a khatir inspired by the Lord of Truth, al-haq, comes only to the heart, free from anything apart from Him. As He has said in the Quran, Allah forbid that we should seize anyone except Him with whom we found our property. And this is what's called iltimas or ishara. Surah Yusuf, right? When Yusuf alayhi salam and his young brother Benjamin, who was with the other 12 brothers, and he wanted to protect him, and so he put the stolen merchandise in the rihad, in the camel of Benjamin, and then they offered themselves instead to be taken. And this is what the Aziz said: Allah forbid, the leader, and Allah forbid that we should seize anyone except him with whom we found our property. Right. So Allah is only going to seize, right, or the khatir is going to seize only the heart where the property is found, or the one that is turned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His remembrance, His dhikr, are present with you, your heart will certainly be filled with His nearness, and the notions suggested by the devil, the passions in this world, will all avoid your company. Right? Inna Allah ghalibun ala amri. Nothing can compete with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if that's truly what's in your heart, don't worry about shaitan and nafs and dunya and hawa, all these other things. They're nothing. They're not even an afterthought compared to the haqq. But the issue then is to be preoccupied with the haqq, to be preoccupied with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make Him the focus of our aspirations, of our dreams, of our hopes, and so forth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us to get there too. Sometimes He'll deprive us of things in order for us to turn back to Him. Sometimes He will put things on our path to steer us in the right direction. And this is the life of the believer, right? I think we talked, I'm not sure if it was this class or one of the tafsir, but we said that the Prophet ﷺ had obvious career that is recorded in the seerah, right? And it talks about how he was born an orphan. His father had passed while he was in the womb, and then his mother not too long after he was born, and then he was wet nursed by Halima Sa'adiyya in the outskirts of the countryside of Mecca in Bani Sa'ad, and then he was raised by his grandfather, who then passed away, then his uncle, then he was in the care of his uncle till he matured and grew to be an adult, and he was a caravan trader for a while, eventually formed a partnership with Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha, then they married, and then the angel came to Ghar Hira, and then after that he began the da'wah, first 2.5 years kind of surreptitiously, then after that more openly, then more opposition came to him in Mecca, and then there was the boycott, and all of Banu Hashim was avoided, both in terms of marriage, in terms of trading of goods. And then eventually the Izn came for the permission for some of the Sahaba to go to Ethiopia or Abyssinia for Hijrah, and then the Hijrah to Al-Medina for all of them after that. And the Prophet ﷺ was the last one, and all the things he did during the Hijrah process to avoid capture by the Quraysh. And then he gets to Al-Medina, and then he forms the nascent community, and his camel tells him where to stay, and then he builds the masjid, and then the Ghazawat, and then Fath Makkah, the last thing, in Hajj al-Wada', the last Hajj, or the farewell Hajj. So many people are familiar with kind of the events of the seerah, but corresponding to those events, there was a spiritual career for the Prophet ﷺ. And he perhaps alluded to this when he said, "Addabani Rabbi fa ahsana ta'dibi." My Lord has inculcated in me adab, and He is the best one to do that. So adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we call ups and downs of life, ebbs and flows, hills and valleys, successes and disappointments, or successes and setbacks. These are actually things that will steer you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you see them that way. So everyone, in a sense, has a spiritual career or trajectory. And the biggest musibah, calamity, is not to recognize that, is not to see that, and just see it as a stringing along of random events that are happening in your life, and you're not really sure what to make of it. No, what you make of it is, what is the spiritual response? So if you consider all the events in your life as having their spiritual, a spiritual impetus to do something, then it warrants a spiritual response. And that's why the spiritual masters, they say that if you find yourself in obedience, then this requires gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if in disobedience, this requires istighfar. If you're in baliya, if you're in a tribulation, then this requires sabr and forbearance. And if you're in a ni'mah, a blessing, then also shukr and minna lillah, and having all gratitude only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so forth. So the believer then will go through these maqamat al-iman, and each time one of these things comes up, especially if it's a tribulation, hopefully, inshallah, they'll deal with it in a better way than they did with the one previous to it, because now they've been trained to some degree. And Allah promises us, as we've said many times, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Surely you'll be tried by loss of profit, loss of life, loss of wealth. All of these things are going to happen. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. But give the bishara, the glad tidings, the good news to the sabirin, the ones who are who patiently persevere. It's probably the best way I can translate it. And then the ayah in Surah At-Tawbah, قل إن كان آباؤكم وأزواجكم وأموالكم واقترفتم وعشيرتكم وتجارة تخشون كسادها إلى آخر الآية أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله فتربصوا وجهادا في سبيله فتربصوا. Say if your parents and if your wealth and profits you're worried about losing, and your homes and all these things are more beloved to you than Allah and His Prophet and striving in His way, فَتَرَبَّصُوا, right? And here it's like a challenge. Just then wait, see how it's going to end up for you at the end with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the most important thing to be Him, because He is the one most worthy of being the most important thing. And then if He's the most important thing, then He should be the one who's occupying our thoughts and taking up the most space, and I would say exclusively in our hearts. So he then says there is a kind of notion belonging to this world and a notion belonging to the hereafter. There's a notion belonging to the angels, a notion belonging to the lower self, the nafs, and a notion belonging to the heart. There is also a notion belonging to the Lord of Truth. It is therefore necessary for you, Ya Sadiq, O truthful one, to get rid of all those other notions to rely on the notion of the Lord of Truth, Azza wa Jal. If you rejected the notion of the lower self, the notion of the passions, the devil's notion and the notion of this world, the notion of the hereafter will come to you. Then you will receive the angel's notion, then finally the notion of the Lord of Truth, Al-Haq. This is the ultimate stage. So preceded by Al-Ta'alluq bil-Akhirah, to be connected with the Akhirah, so doing ta'at and good deeds, and hopefully to have a good khitam, to have a good ending in this life, which is actually the new beginning in the next. And then if one continues on that way, as mentioned in the Hadith al-Qudsi, تفعل النوافل حتى الله سبحانه وتعالى يحبك فإذا أحببته, right? Then if I love Him, كنت سمعه الذي يسمع به وبصره الذي يبصر به ويده الذي يبطش بها إلى آخر الحديث. So then when I love Him, after He's done these ta'at, in other words, there's ta'alluq bil-akhirah, there's connection to the akhirah, then the connection now will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's, what is the sign of that? What is the alama? Then I will be the hearing by which He hears, the eyes by which He sees, the hand by which He strikes, the feet by which He walks, and then at the end of that hadith, and if we were to ask me something, I would surely give it to Him. هذا مقام الولاية, right? This is the wilaya al-kubra hatta laysat as-sughra. This is the end stage or highest stage, wilaya. That's what he says here. This is the ultimate stage. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers your dua, the نوع من التصريف, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers your dua because your dua is only going to fall into those things that are completely conforming to the will and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you'll never ask for something that's outside of that. So the wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to ask for anything that's outside of those confines. So when your heart is sound, then it will pause to ask each notion as it arises, what kind of notion are you? From what source do you come? Here is the important part, right? So we've said this many times. It's not about slaying the nafs and then it goes away and never comes back. It's going to be there still, but now you have your your goggles on or your eyeglasses, you could see it when it's coming, or at least you can recognize it when it's speaking to you. So to be able to distinguish between the different khawatir really is a kenz. It's a treasure to have that, to be able to discern. So he says, when your heart is sound, though, it will pause to ask each notion as it arises. What kind of notion are you? Right? This is the heart. Qalb al-sahi. It's alive. It's healthy. From what source do you come? So they will tell him in turn, I am the notion of such and such. So if it's khatir nafsani, right, or shaytani, you'll be able to recognize it. Like Imam Junaid when he was making wudu, and then he got a khatir, like, oh, I didn't go back and wipe your left arm or wash your left arm because you forgot to do it. He said, Ya mal'oon, I washed my left arm. He knew it was from shaitan. So he says, Ya mal'oon, oh cursed one, I know I wiped my left arm. So he recognized that هذا خاطر shaitani, and another name for it, because this is the major form it comes in, is waswasa. Waswasa means to have kind of a obsessive compulsive khatira, notion about things, especially they say in matters of tahara, especially matters of ablution and wudu and ghusl and things like that. But waswasa can come in other forms, right? Sometimes it can come even in the sense of paranoia about people's intentions towards you and things like that. هذه تسمى waswasa, and it's a difficult thing to overcome, and probably it can even reach clinical levels that need some maybe other form of treatment. But I think at its base, at its foundation, it comes from shaitan. And so the qalb, the heart that is sound, will be able to recognize, oh, that's from shaitan, oh, this is from my nafs, or this is from the angel, or this is truly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So it will tell him in turn, I am the notion of such and such, I am a true notion from the truth. Khatir haq min al-haq, I am a loving counselor, the Lord of truth. Allah loves you, so I love you too. Then you will be able to recognize that as well. I am the ambassador, the safir. I am your portion of the spiritual state of prophethood, nubuwwah. Who's saying this? Al-Khatir. So the Khatir that's coming to say, I am the ambassador from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah, this is what we mean by, it's actually a type of ilham. It's a type of inspiration. Allah puts this inspiration in your heart directly. So let's skip around a little bit because this course is kind of a little bit lengthy. The one after it is even much lengthier than this, but we'll try to pick out the parts that are most relevant. So he talks a little bit about trial and tribulation, that I think it's important, and its place in our understanding. So if you're following along, this is page 402. I'll just read it from the English. He says, there are certain inner matters, umur batina, that come to be disclosed only after one has attained to the Lord of Truth, the Haqq, stood at his door and met the specially selected individuals. I wouldn't say mufradun, I would say al-mufarridun, because that's the riwayah in the hadith, al-mufarridun, alladhina يعني أفرضوا أو فرضوا المفردون سبق المفردون يعني the ones who are the mufarridun, they have advanced ahead of everyone else, the ones who are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the mufarridun and the nuwab, these are all maqamat wilaya, right? Like the abdal, who are there at their posts. When you attain to the Lord of Truth, al-haq, and stand waiting with good matters and with head bowed in silence, the door will be opened in front of your heart. It will be drawn in by the one who draws it in. It will be brought near by the one who brings it near. It will be lulled to sleep by the one, all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who prepares it for marriage. It will be anointed by the one who anoints it. It will be adorned by the one who adorns it. It will be delighted by the one who delights it. It will be kept safe by the one who keeps it safe. It will be conversed with by the one who converses with it, and talked to you by the one who talks to it. Oh, you are heedless of bliss and na'im, where are you? Your hearts are so far from the state of affairs I am hinting at. You imagine this to be such a simple matter that it can come about for you through artificial pretense at tasannu', right? Make sure you got wearing the right clothes and got the right hat, and you're, all set up so you look like someone who's in that. But if you're not actually there, then this is known as a tasannu', right? Pretense. Affected simulation or takalluf, right? So you try to appear, and this was something that happened quite often, especially during the time of Shaykh Abd al-Jilani. People tried to appear like, very pious, and especially, downtrodden and besieged with, with their very powerful spiritual state, so people can take pity on them and, give them money. And this was a practice condemned by all of the great masters, like al-Qadir al-Jilani, and like Imam al-Ghazali, and like Ibn Ata al-Sakandari, and like Ibn Arabi al-Hatimi, many others condemned this. Shaykh Mustafa Bakr al-Siddiqi, who lived in a later period in the 12th century, even wrote a whole treatise about it, about this Ahl al-Zandiqa wal-Ilhad, he called them. So people of heresy, because they had these very superficial, pretentious way of carrying them in their states, and it did a lot of damage to the understanding of tasawwuf. And unfortunately, we're still kind of living some of that. So certainly there is a concerted agenda in many places, and has been, and funded by a lot of wealth, to kind of disparage tasawwuf and the science of it, and to kind of portray it as some sort of neo-Islamic movement, which it's not. It is a discipline. It's a spiritual discipline. It's the spiritual discipline of Islam. That's just the name that's attached to it. We can call it ihsan, we can call it tazkiyah, we can call it other things. But the madmoon, what it actually is that it is the lub, it is the essence of the deen. That's why Ibn Hassan al-Shadhili, he said, whoever does not delve into this science of ours, the spiritual discipline of tasawwuf, then they will die in a state, and it's like they are dying in a sinful state. So he meant that you have to think about your akhlaq, you have to think about your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just doing the outward acts of obedience, while it's required, it doesn't end there, right? That's just kind of the beginning, that's the first step. But since we have people who pray and people who pay zakah and who have very bad akhlaq, very bad character, and do all sorts of things that are incorrect, then it means that there has to be something that goes, beyond that. And so those things are a means by which we can get to that. And this science, this spiritual discipline of tasawwuf, is something that developed over centuries in order to give us that. And when people say, well, what about the Quran and Sunnah? Isn't that enough? And why do they have to add all this stuff? It's like you plant a seedling or a sapling, let's say a tree, and you irrigate it, and it's beginning to grow, and these things take maybe years to grow. So the first caretaker of it kind of has to move on, and another caretaker comes, and they continue to irrigate it, and it continues to grow and grow and grow. And then someone comes after all of that growth, after 100 years, and it sees it's like this sequoia, and it's like 300 feet high, and they say, all that's bid'ah. Where is the original? Where's the original sapling? It's supposed to be only this high. It's supposed to be only 3 feet high. That's what I want. And what did they do? They chopped down the whole tree, and what are they left with? A lifeless stump. And that's exactly what these people do. They're left with a lifeless stump. That's what they made of the deen, just a lifeless stump. And no, it's not just one sequoia, it's a forest of sequoia. So yes, there are developments that happened over the centuries and understandings that came into play. And if you think all of that was some accident that was wrong, and now here we are in, what would they attribute to the 19th century, the late 18th century, someone living in the middle of a desert that was of no consequence to all of Islamic history, pretty much. All those centuries, now he got it right and he figured it out, and everybody else is a mushrik. And now that's the deen that we call Islam. Abada. Nothing can be further from the truth. So yeah, these things are there and they have been built, and they are all part of the divine plan. And if you think that they're not, then you have a pretty bad opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he will allow the ummah to go wrong for the better part of 12 or 13 centuries, and then assign to someone who's just a regular imam, basically in a mosque in the middle of the desert, to have figured it all for us. And then all the works of al-Ghazali, al-Razi, Abd al-Qadir, al-Jilani, Ibn Arabi, Imam al-Qurtubi, and all of the ulama from al-Andalus and from North Africa and from Egypt and from Greater Syria and from Baghdad in its heyday. All of that just doesn't count. And it's kind of a metaphor for the world right now, that we put more stock and value in things that are more about spectacle, right? And we have this kind of aversion to intellectualism and saying that things, maybe they take some training to understand and maybe take some effort from you. And if you can't get it, within 3 minutes, then, maybe it's still worth your time, and not to just dismiss it outright. But, look at social media and how people communicate, and the decreasing attention spans, to the degree I heard some statistic that the average attention span now, something like 8 or 9 seconds, where people are trained on you and then they're going to go think about something else. And then these are the caliber of people who are interpreting the deen for us and telling us that this is what it means and this is what it doesn't mean. So, لله الأمر من قبل ومن بعد. So, back to the important thing. So he said, when you attain to the Lord of Truth and stand waiting with good manner, we read that part already. So, O you who are heedless of bliss, where are you? Your hearts are so far from the state of affairs I am hinting at. You imagine this to be such a simple matter that it can come about through artificial pretense, tasanna, as we mentioned, affected simulation, takalluf, hypocrisy, nifaq. In fact, it requires honesty, sidq, and patient endurance of the hammer blows of destiny, of qadar, hada ta'deeb, right? So this is part of your spiritual career. Things are going to come your way. You're going to be faced with loss, and you're going to be faced with strife. And he's going to go into it more, how that looks like exactly. So he says, if you are a rich and healthy person engaged in disobedience to the haqq, but you turn in repentance for all your sins and errors, both those that are obvious and those that are concealed, and you go off into the deserts and the wastelands and seek the countenance of Allah, you will have to experience being put to the test. You will have to experience trials and tribulations. Your lower self or nafs will demand the worldly goods and the well-being to which it has been accustomed, but you must not agree to let it have what it wants. If it can exercise patience, you will obtain the dominion of both this world and the hereafter. But if it does not exercise patience, all this will pass it by. O penitent, you must be steadfast and sincere. You must decide, together with your lower self, to let things turn around, let the trials and tribulations come. You must decide together with it that the Lord of Truth, al-Haqq, is going to keep it awake all night and make it go thirsty all day, that he will drive a wedge between it and your family, neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, that he will sow hatred of it in their hearts, and that none of them will approach it or come near it. This is a possibility. And then he brings the example of Sayyidina Ayub or Job. Surely you must have heard the story of Ayub or Job, alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wished to love him and choose him for his own, right? يختص بنفسه. This is a inaya, it's a special type of love. And that no one but he should be left with any share in him. How he separated him from his goods, his family, his children, his companions, and made him live in a shack on top of a garbage dump away from civilization because of his sickness. None of his family stayed with him except his wife, who worked as a servant for people and brought him his food. Then he took away his flesh and his skin and his strength and left him only with his hearing, his sight, and his heart, in which he showed the wonders of his power. Ajab al-Qudra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he used to remember him with his tongue and would converse with him intimately with his heart. He would behold the wonders of his power with his sight, while his spirit, his ruh, came and went in his physical frame. The angels would pray for him and come to visit him. He was cut off from humankind, al-ins, while intimate friendship was connected with him. And that's the play on words, or kind of the ins means people, al-uns means intimacy. So he didn't have ins, he didn't have people, but he had uns billah. Material means and force and energies were cut off from him, while he remained the prisoner of his love, his destiny, his qadar, his power, qudra, his will, his irada, and his foreordination, or his sabiqa. His state of affairs was a mystery, a sir, and then in the end it came to be public knowledge. Sayyidina Ayub. The first part was bitter, but the second became sweet. Life became pleasant for him in the midst of his misfortune, just as life became pleasant for Ibrahim alayhi salam in the midst of his fiery furnace, right? When he was cast from the catapulted into the fire pit that they had prepared for 40 days in a row, to the degree it was so hot, birds would fly over it and they would be burned to a crisp instantly. But yet when he was cast into the fire pit and he was there, it said, some of the narrations say he stayed there a month and that he had uns, right, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah protected him. كوني بردا وسلاما يا نار كوني بردا وسلاما على إبراهيم. It was said to the fire, be cool and be peaceful to Ibrahim. So this was the state of Ayub. This was the state of Ibrahim. This was also, you find this trajectory in the spiritual career of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And if the prophets are exemplars and they're the ones that we follow, then we could also expect something similar to that. So in the interest of time and running out, there's one other thing I just wanted to read, inshallah. Sorry for the delay, just trying to find the section. So this is page 414. Right after the verse, he shall not be questioned as to what he does, but they shall be questioned. This is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submitting to his decree. Then he says, even if he, Allah, were to send one of the prophets, Anbiya, and the righteous, as-Salihin, into the fire of hell, he would be just, adil, and that would be the telling argument. Because al-Malik yatasarrafu fi mulkihi kama yasha, the sovereign, or al-Malik, dispenses with his dominion as he pleases, as he wills. So even if Allah were to punish all of us, this would not be dhulm, this would not be unjust. It would be adl from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anything that received then of bliss is tafaddul and rahmah, right? It is grace and it is mercy of the good that we receive, even for the prophets. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ said. he said, لا يدخل أحدكم الجنة بعمله. No one will enter paradise by their deeds, right? By the sum of their deeds. They said, even you, Ya Rasulullah? He said, even me, unless Allah encompasses me in His mercy. So then he says, it is incumbent upon us to say the commander has told the truth. Sadaq al-Amir. And it is not for us to say why and how could this possibly happen. في تقلبات الحياة, right? The circumstances of your life. How did this happen? Why did this happen? صدق الأمين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أراد ذلك. This is what He wanted. Even if it has some basis in justice and right, such a thing could never be, and He would never do anything of the kind. In other words, we shouldn't say that, right? If whatever Allah chooses for us is just, من حيث الحقيقة, right? From the ultimate divine right, it's all just. The whole world as it is all just. Is there injustice and suffering in the world? Yes. But by as much as it's the decree of God, it's not injustice from God to us. That's not true. So human beings can be unjust to one another, and then there's certain corrections we should take. And that's why we find these conjunctions in the Quran about fighting oppression and fighting injustice, but we should never attribute such injustice to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the overall scheme of things. Then he says, listen to me and try to grasp what I have to say. For I am the humble servant, al-Ghulam, of those who have gone on before us. I stand in their presence. I spread out their wares and invite people to examine them. I never cheat in the process and do not pretend that they are my own property. I begin by quoting what they have said. Then I go over from my own point of view, methodology of Shaykh. It's not bringing this from out of his own volition, but this is what he has imbibed, right? And this is what the people who want the sapling tree don't understand, and nabita, right? They want the weeds, and they don't understand that someone like Shaykh Abd al-Jilani embodies the Quran and Sunnah. He's a walking Quran and Sunnah, just like his grandfather was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, walking Quran and Sunnah. Just like Sayyidina al-Hussein, Sayyidina al-Hasan, Sayyidina Zayn al-Abidin, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. They're walking Quran and Sunnah. So what they say, what they do is authoritative. Is it authoritative to the absolute point in the books of fiqh? No, but it's authoritative of taking for us as an example. And looking at their spiritual careers and their pronouncements, there's much to be gained by studying that. So then he says, blessed grace, barakah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah has bestowed many blessings upon me. Such as my obedience to the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and my birr, my filial piety toward my father and my mother. May Allah have mercy upon them both. My father abstained from the pleasures of this world, although he had the power to enjoy them, while my mother went along with him in this and approved of what he did. They are among the people of righteousness, salah, religious devotion, diyana, and compassion for all creatures. But my real concern is not with them, nor with other people. I have come to the bearer of the message, al-Rasul, and the sender of the message, al-Mursil, Allah, and because of them I prosper. Every benefit and blessing of mine is with them in their presence. Among creatures, I wish for no one apart from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and among lords for none but my Lord Azza wa Jal. So may Allah make us of this caliber, or at least worthy of reading the words of a person of such a caliber. Inshallah, may imbibe that within us. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.